Okay, so we're picking up where we left off in part one of Functionalism, Anomie, and Strain. To go back to the question that we ended with, what happens to all of the people who are socialized to want wealth, power, and prestige, but who will never be able to acquire them? Well, we get an answer from Robert Merton and Robert Merton's strain theory. All right, so before we talk about Robert Merton, I do want to go back slightly and give a quick reminder about Emil Durkheim and his argument about anomie, because Merton makes use of the concept of anomie, like a different version of it, in his strain theory. So if we go back to Durkheim, we discussed anomie as a state of normlessness. So in other words, the norms that once govern life fall away, and there's nothing to guide behavior or limit desire. And under those circumstances, we can see people turning to deviance. So again, this can happen at the individual or social level. So we talked about at the societal level, and economic collapse can radically change people's lives so that, you know, the social institutions and social rules that were in place stop being in place, right? They break down. We can also talk about anomie at the individual level, where through the loss of a spouse or radical changes in one's financial situation can, you know, upend what one's expectations are about, you know, what's going to happen to them on any given day, or what they can, you know, how they're supposed to live, or how they're supposed to see the world, or how they're supposed to act. If that goes away, people experience this state of normlessness, which we're going to call anomie. And until new norms are established, people are in a situation where they can be deviant. Now, Merton, Robert Merton, takes the concept of anomie and he tweaks it. So he is thinking about anomie, again, in a fairly different way. So rather than thinking about anomie as being a state of normlessness, he's describing anomie as something people experience when they're not able to achieve the goals that society wants them to achieve. So there is this element of normlessness in there, where there are these social rules governing, hey, here's what you're supposed to be doing with your life. Here's what you're supposed to want. Here's how you're supposed to want it. Here's how you're supposed to achieve those things. And well, if there's a disconnect between what you are socialized to want, so one's aspirations, and your opportunities to achieve those aspirations, then there's going to be then you're going to experience that anomie. You're going to experience that strain, that negative emotion, the sort of bad feelings. And so for Merton, a situation is anomic when there's a breakdown between what he calls the culturally defined goals and the institutionalized means of achieving those goals. So to define the terms, so culturally defined goals are those goals that society or culture socializes us to see as valuable or appropriate or right or desirable. And institutionalized means are the socially acceptable or legitimate ways of achieving culturally prescribed goals. So we have the goals themselves, and then we have the appropriate or the socially defined appropriate way to reach those goals. So like, what kind of goals and means are we talking about? Well, so if we're thinking about the contemporary United States, one goal that's held up is you're supposed to want a family, right? And well, how are you supposed to achieve building a family? Through monogamous dating and marriage. Okay. Now, it's not to say everybody does this, but if one doesn't, then there's that social judgment that can come along with, you know, violating these rules. Becoming an adult, so moving from childhood to adulthood rather. And you know, one means, if you're among the Jewish community, would be something like a bar or bat mitzvah, and so that's the ritual, you know, rite of passage in which a child who is Jewish becomes officially recognized as a member of the adult community, right? So it's an official socially recognized step. It's like, this is one of the things that you need to do in order to be recognized or seen as an adult. And being an adult is something that, you know, we hold up to kids, like, hey, this is what your goal is. You want to grow up and you want to contribute to society. So right among this particular group, there is a specific ritual associated with that transition. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly one thing. Financial success is something that's held up pretty much universally. And we hold out, or we say, here's how you achieve financial success. You go to school, you get an education, and then you get a job, right? And you get a job in a legal industry, you work hard at that job, you get promoted, and eventually you will be successful. And under normal circumstances, right? So for the majority of people, or at least theoretically, we tend to think that for the majority of people, maybe not accurately, but under normal circumstances, an individual will be socialized to accept the culturally prescribed goals. So these things, right, will be socialized to want the family, want to become an adult, want to become financially successful or financially secure. And so we'll accept those culturally prescribed goals, and we will pursue them using socially legitimate means. So we will try to achieve those goals in the way that society says, hey, this is how you're supposed to achieve goals. This is how you're supposed to get a family. This is how you're supposed to get become financially successful. You need to take this particular path. Don't do these other things. You need to do these things. Here are the steps you should take. Okay. But the process often breaks down. And in these situations, when we do have this breakdown, this disconnect between what someone is socialized to want to achieve, so what one aspires to, and the means through which we offer to achieve those goals, people experience anomie. So again, this goes back to the definition I gave a while ago. So anomie emerges from these situations in which an individual is not able to achieve goals that society socializes them to want to achieve. And in these situations, people experience strain. Again, there's that disconnect. They want something, but there's no way to get it, or no legitimate way to get it. And so they experience an emotion. They experience a response to that. They experience this intense pressure to take advantage of, so this is a quote from Akers, strain is a pressure to take advantage of whatever effective means to success or income they can find, even if these means are illegitimate or illegal. So this definition refers specifically to success or income, right? So like achieving, like getting a good job or something. But I want to take this concept and broaden it a little bit. So we want to think about strain as pressure to take advantage of whatever effective means of achieving the socially or culturally prescribed goals. All right, and so strain, we can think of it in emotional terms. So these are the situations in which strain appears, and some people define strain as in situational terms. We can also think about strain as anger and frustration that people experience when they're in situations like this, right? When they can't achieve what they have been socialized to want to achieve. And as a result, people cope with deviance. So in other words, deviance comes from adapting to strain. There's a breakdown between culturally defined goals and the socially legitimate means or institutionalized means, and deviance emerges from those conditions. And since how we talked before about how inequality is going to be built into the system, we have to motivate everybody to want wealth, power, and prestige, even though not everybody can get it. We end up with a whole bunch of people who are motivated to want things that they can't get. And so deviance is built into the system. Here we get back to that idea of functionalism, right? So the system itself is designed in a particular way. And as a result of that, we have people who are going to experience strain and who will then become deviant, or can potentially become deviant. Merton created what's called a typology. What a typology is just a system of categorizing or a way of classifying different types of people or groups or events or behaviors or whatever it is. In this case, he creates a typology of adaptation, or the modes of adaptation. Essentially, these different ways of reacting when one experiences anomie or strain. And so he creates, this is a very common table. If you take enough criminology classes, you're going to see this over and over again. It does take a little bit of explanation though, and I'm going to break this down in some detail. But just to quickly give an overview of what this is. So we have over here, left column, these are the different modes of adaptation. Again, I'll break them down. So these are the different types of people. So we have a typology, and within the argument is that people are going to fall into one of 5 of these categories. Then we have cultural goals here, and whether or not the type of person accepts or rejects the cultural goals. So people can be socialized effectively, so they want the things that they're supposed to want, or socialization can fail, right? So you can be brought up in an environment where you're taught to want particular things, but like the socialization doesn't work, and you end up not wanting those things, you're not caring about them. So that's a possibility too. And then there's this issue of institutionalized means. So does the person accept the institutionalized means as legitimate? Like, hey, yeah, these are the things I am supposed to do. I accept that these are the things I'm supposed to do. Or do they reject them? Do they say, nope, I'm not, I don't agree with the messages I've received from society, so I'm going to reject the message I've received about here's how I should try to achieve my goals. And this is kind of lost in the language of the table. And this is more important in a lot of ways with institutionalized means. It's not just a question of whether or not people accept those means as legitimate or accept them as appropriate. It's also this issue of whether or not they have access to them. So when we say reject here, I'm going to go through these one by one. As I do, I just want to make sure to point out that in some cases, the people are going to reject, like say, no, I do not agree that the institutionalized means are appropriate here. But in most cases, it's going to be a question of whether or not the person has access to the institutionalized means, right? So whether or not they can follow the path that society has prescribed. I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Yeah, this is a bit disjointed. I apologize. I'm going to try and make this. I think let me move on from this and let's talk examples. And I think that will do a better job than me trying to discuss this abstract table. So our first type of person are called conformists. Now, quick thing: conformists do not actually experience strain, and they don't experience anomie. The majority of people are conformists. And these are the folks that accept the cultural goals. So they've been socialized effectively to want the things that society says we're supposed to want. And to one degree or another, they accept and have access to the institutionalized means to achieve those goals. So what are we talking about? Well, so if we go back to some of the examples I gave a while ago, so building a family, right? Well, if you accept that those cultural goals, or that cultural goal is indeed appropriate, and you have access to and you accept the institutionalized means, then you'll pursue a family through a process of monogamous dating and monogamous marriage. The goal of achieving financial success, if that's accepted, and the person has access to the institutionalized means, well, then that's a person who will graduates high school and then potentially go on to college. If they go on to college, then you're going to use the college degree to get a good so-called good job. If they don't go on to college, well, then they're going to go from high school to the job market, and they're going to try and find the best job that they can. Best usually in terms of, again, wealth, power, and prestige, usually wealth, actually, but all of them are mixed together to an extent. So conformists do not experience anomie, and the majority of people are conformists. If you are taking a class at a college, you are probably a conformist. You're not definitely conformist, but you're probably a conformist. Well, I mean, why is that? Well, you're, in all likelihood, you are taking the class or classes to get a degree in order to get a good job, right? So you have the goal that's been laid out. And the fact that you are registered at a college means that you have, to one degree or another, at least some access to the institutionalized means, right? So you have some access to school. Not everybody does. Not everybody can pay for school. Not everybody can get into school, colleges, whatever. But by virtue of being enrolled in a class, you very likely are a conformist. Not definitely, but you're very likely a conformist. Then we have innovators. Typically, we think of the word innovation, and we usually are thinking in terms of economic innovation. So somebody invents something, somebody is an entrepreneur and they come up with a new way of marketing something, or whatever it is. We tend to associate the word innovation with positive feelings, right? We tend to think of innovation and innovators as being good things. Within the context of Merton's argument, though, innovators are going to be deviants, okay? These are people who accept the cultural goals, so they accept the idea that we should try to achieve wealth status and prestige, but they reject or more likely do not have access to the institutionalized means of achieving those goals. So innovators design, essentially, they essentially design their own means for achieving culturally defined goals. So we often think of innovators in criminal terms, which I'll talk about in a second. Before I do, though, I want to point out that even though in a lot of discussions about innovators, the focus will be on people who are turned to criminality, turned to criminal means to achieve goals. Again, it's not always how it goes, though. So for instance, day laborers, so people who don't have access to stable work, but who will congregate in places, one of the stereotypical ones, places like Home Depot or wherever, where they'll kind of hang out in a group, and contractors or somebody who just needs someone to work for an afternoon or a day or whatever will drive up and will just say, okay, I'll take you, and the day laborer will hop in the back of a truck or hop in a car or something, and will work for the day under the table, almost certainly. And then once the job is done, and once that day's over, they are back to the corner the next day. It's all, off the books. It's oftentimes technically illegal, although, sometimes it's a bit sketchy, whether or not it is illegal or not, but it's definitely not seen as an appropriate path or an appropriate way to earn a living. Right? We look down on it as a society. Things like panhandling, so sitting along a sidewalk and what we might have called begging in the past, asking for money. Generally not illegal, depends on where you are, but generally not illegal, but definitely looked down on, and we don't tell kids, say, hey, grow up and be like that guy who's asking people for money as they walk by and making people feel bad and guilty. Be that person. No, we don't. I mean, if anything, if we even acknowledge people who are panhandling, you might tell a kid like, hey, that person's in a difficult spot. You know how you can avoid being like that person? Well, work hard, study hard, and get a good job, and pay attention in school, and you can avoid living on the street or begging people for money. We certainly don't see that as something that we want our kids to do or that we want to do ourselves. Like, we look down on it. And something that doesn't often come up in conversations about innovation are alternative ways of building families. So something like polyamory is something I've mentioned a few times. It's becoming more and more normalized, but in a lot of corners, it's actually something that people maybe have never heard of or are pretty shocked by the idea of, but it's becoming more and more common. I'm actually guessing that if you're watching this, there's going to be a decent number of people who watch this who are going to say, oh, yeah, no big deal. I'm polyamorous, or my friends are, or my parents are, or whoever. But I'm guessing the majority either have heard of it and just reject it out of hand as either infidelity or as some sexual deviancy or something else, or just have never heard of it, right? So yeah, but regardless, it's not the typical socially accepted way to build a family, right? And yeah. Okay. But generally, when we're thinking about innovators, we are usually thinking in terms of criminals. That tends to be the most common sort of place that we're coming from, the most common angle. And so this is, again, I've used this picture before, a guy named Sean Murphy, who wrote a book called Master Thief, How to Be a Professional Burglar. I think I've mentioned this before, I believe, but he wrote that book while he was in jail. So probably don't want to listen to his advice because he was in jail. He still is, I believe. So he's a criminal. He was a thief, literally, committed some pretty serious, pretty shocking crimes. So for instance, the attempt to rob a warehouse full of armored trucks, like those armored trucks that drive around and deliver money to places. He tried to rob a warehouse full of them. So not the armored trucks themselves, but like literally a warehouse full of armored trucks. Got caught. So maybe not as good as you think you are there, Sean. Another type of innovator would be drug dealers, right? So they're trying to earn money through the process of selling drugs, so they're engaged in some kind of illicit activity. Other sorts of things, you know, sex workers, people who are embezzling, insider traders. I mean, all kinds of, like, anybody who is breaking the law in order to earn money is going to be an innovator. Then we move on to the ritualists. So I said a bit ago that if you are watching this for a class, then you are probably conformist. That's still true, but there's a chance you could be a ritualist as well. The ritualists reject the cultural goals, but accept the institutionalized means for achieving those goals. It's a little bit weird. It's not super intuitive. So the ritualists, if we think about the desire to want wealth, power, and prestige, if you're a ritualist, you were socialized to want those things, but for whatever reason, it didn't take, right? You weren't convinced, you weren't socialized hard enough or effectively enough. So you really, haven't internalized those goals, so you don't really care. You don't care as much as you're supposed to. But you accept and have access and make use of, or access to and make use of, the institutionalized means for achieving those goals. So you don't necessarily want wealth, power, or prestige, but you do all the things that people who want wealth, power, and prestige are supposed to do. It's a bit strange. And the problem is that in terms of describing what ritualists do, is that ritualists look like conformists, except maybe they're more bored and frustrated and annoyed. So here's the difference, right? So you can imagine, let's go back here. So a conformist is someone who is going to be in school because they want to get a degree, because they want to get a good job, because they want to make good money, they want to be respected in their society, they want to have power over themselves and their lives and potentially other people as well. And so they go out and they do the things that they're supposed to do in order to achieve those goals, right? They go out there, they get the education, they work on getting the job, and they do what they're supposed to. But they're not just doing it because they're supposed to, not just going through the motions, they're doing it because they want to achieve the goals. Ritualists, on the other hand, don't want to achieve those goals, don't necessarily care about them, but they go through the motions. They do the things. They go to college, they go get the job, they get married. Why do they do that? Just because they're supposed to. A lot of people end up in college this way, right? So they, when you're a kid, you get old enough, you go to elementary school, and then you go to middle school, and then you go to high school, and then depending on where you live, it might just be like the next thing is college. That's just what you're supposed to do. So you go to college. And then once you are done with college, you're supposed to get a job. So then you get a job. So it's, just like somebody who goes from elementary school to middle school is doing that because they're supposed to. Society just told them they're supposed to. They don't necessarily, want to be at the middle school or the high school. They're just going through the motions. They're doing it because they're supposed to. And that's what ritualists do. So if you're in school because you're just supposed to be there, but you're not worried about wealth, status, and prestige, and you probably never will be, but you're doing it kind of almost robotically or mechanically, you might be a ritualist. If you go to work and you are just there because you're supposed to be there, and you're going to keep going there every day because of just habit and routine, you're a ritualist. So the term ritualist implies mindlessly following rules and doing what you're supposed to, even though there's no purpose behind it, right? So, the majority of people are going to be conformists, but mixed in among the conformists are going to be a significant number of ritualists. And, it's not going to be easy to tell them apart, except the ritualists are going to be a lot less happy with their lives. But, otherwise it's probably not going to be too much of an open difference between them, but they certainly are deviant, right? They are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're experiencing strain. Oh, I'm sorry. They are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? So they are experiencing that negative emotions, those frustrations, and so on. Then we come to the retreatists, another sort of odd one, because I think we have trouble sometimes wrapping our heads around the idea of rejecting the cultural goals. But retreatists reject the cultural goals, so they're if we take the example of contemporary America, they're not interested in the wealth, power, prestige stuff, and they reject the institutionalized means of achieving wealth, power, and prestige. So unlike the ritualists, who just kind of do what they're so-called supposed to, the retreatists don't. Okay, they do something else. Well, what do? Well, they retreat. Oh, my phone is ringing. See, when you leave your phone on and it goes off, that is deviance right there, and you shouldn't do that. I turned my ringer off, actually. I don't know why that happened. I totally did. Bleh, stupid phone. Anyway, what was I talking about? Something about Merton? Okay, yeah. So Merton. Okay, so retreatists reject the cultural goals and reject the institutionalized means of achieving those goals. And so they retreat, they withdraw from society, essentially. So like the Amish are an example of this. So the Amish live a very different lifestyle than most of the other people who live in the world around them, right? So they do not live like the sort of so-called typical American family or American community. But that's on purpose, right? They reject the cultural goals that we have held up. I mean, they're much less focused on building wealth and acquiring power and building prestige in the broader world than most other people are. So those who are homeless, who are living off the grid in one way or another, so people who are withdraw to go live in the woods and live independently on their own for long periods of time or throughout their lives. They are withdrawing. They are leaving society behind them and living within a different sort of different structure, right? So they're just withdrawing from society and kind of living on the fringes or living in some like isolated subculture or one way or another, just removing themselves from the broader culture. And then we have rebels. So rebels reject the cultural goals and the institutionalized means, but instead of withdrawing from society, instead of leaving society, they continue to act within society or the cultures, but they act differently. They accept different cultural goals and they want to potentially replace the cultural goals that exist. So emphasizing, hey, no, not just that I am not interested in wealth, power, and prestige, but you should not be either. And we're going to offer different cultural goals in their place. We're also going to advocate for the reshuffling or the rebuilding or tearing down and rebuilding this social structure that provides access to the means of achieving those goals. So essentially, these are people who want to metaphorically break the system down and replace it with something else. So some examples of this, Hell's Angels, for instance, have different sorts of goals and ways of achieving those goals than others do. Don't have well, at least stereotypically, don't have a lot of respect for the broader culture. If you have someone who is like really legit, like a communist, advocating for the overthrow of capitalism and the redistribution of wealth and everything that goes along with that, then that's going to be a rebel, right? Someone who rejects cultural goals and wants to replace them. Some really hardcore evangelical Christians who, even if they don't say it out loud, would really like to replace the legal system that we currently have with one that's more theocratic, one that's more derived from religious rules or laws. Again, that's not everybody's Christian. I don't want to give that sense, but there are a good number of people who are essentially want to change the social system so that it's more in line with those values and behaviors associated with Christianity. There's a whole bunch. If somebody is a devotee of Ayn Rand and is very libertarian, then depending on how extreme they are, they could fit into the rebel category as well. It depends. I don't know if you can hear the dog. This building doesn't allow dogs, but it's totally out there anyway, which is cool though. Dogs are great. Screw the landlord. I'd rather dog be here. I'm getting so distracted. Wow, okay. All right, so let's see. Yeah, okay. Anyway, Rebellion. Okay, there's that. And that actually brings us through the typology. So yeah, so we have these different types of people: conformist, innovators, ritualists, retreatists, and rebels. And other than the conformists, the rest of them are adapting to the strain that emerges from the disconnect between what they're supposed to want and what they can get. Okay, and that brings us to the end of part 2. We got one more part. It's gonna bring us home. So bye.